The train screeched to a halt with a metallic groan that rattled every rib inside the wooden boxcars. For days, the Germans had traveled west from the Atlantic ports, packed on benches, sweating in wool uniforms that no longer fit the season. The air inside the cars was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of bodies that had not bathed since North Africa or Sicily. They expected another grim station: mud, wire, guards with rifles and dogs. When the sliding doors opened, what swept in was not the stink of war, but a rush of scents that did not belong to captivity at all. Roasted peanuts, gasoline fumes, the faint sweetness of popcorn drifting from a stand, a breeze carrying cut grass and perfume. For men who had last stepped off trains into ruined cities or battlefronts, the dissonance hit like a slap. The guards shouted for them to move, but many froze, staring. Their boots clanged down to a platform where civilians walked freely. Women in bright dresses passed, carrying grocery bags that looked impossibly full. A boy licked an ice cream cone, oblivious to the prisoners shuffling past in dusty uniforms. It was America. They had been told to expect cruelty. Nazi propaganda had hammered the warning into them for years. Capture by Americans meant hunger, humiliation, perhaps death. The Yankees are merchants, not soldiers. They will treat you like cattle, one officer had assured his men in Tunisia. Yet every sense contradicted the warning. Across the street, neon signs glowed openly in daylight. Windows blazed with displays of radios and shoes. Cars filled the roads in numbers that made German soldiers count out loud, unable to believe what they saw. One corporal from Bremen muttered, "In 5 minutes, I have seen more cars than in 5 months at home." His comrade, who had left Berlin under blackout, stared at a diner glowing with light bulbs and whispered, "At home, a candle in the window could bring a fine." The paradox was immediate. The same nation that had unleashed fleets of bombers over Hamburg and Cologne also drowned its own civilians in comfort. How could a country at war burn so bright? By late 1943, the numbers told their own story. More than 370,000 German soldiers had already been captured by U.S. forces, most in North Africa and Sicily. Convoys ferried them across the Atlantic in massive operations guarded by destroyers and corvettes. Each ship carried thousands, stacked in holds designed for cargo. Yet the real cargo, to American planners, was not just manpower, but proof of victory. "We are importing evidence of success," one officer noted in a War Department memo. U.S. National Archives, 1944. The scale was staggering. In 1944 alone, more than 700 German POWs arrived in the United States every day. Camps multiplied across the heartland: Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, Georgia. Each site was designed for thousands, some for tens of thousands. Wooden barracks stretched across farmland. Watchtowers rose, but so did kitchens, soccer fields, even libraries. The United States prepared to house prisoners not for weeks, but for years. For the men inside those trains, the journey was its own education. They rolled through cities whose streets never darkened. Berlin had been under blackout since 1940. A crack of light through curtains could bring a fine. Yet, in Philadelphia, neon hummed above every corner store. Chicago boulevards glowed like daylight even at midnight. Storefronts, still lit after dusk, looked less like wealth than a promise. "We will open tomorrow," one prisoner later wrote, Red Cross Report, 1945. To men from Cologne, where streets were reduced to rubble, the unbroken rhythm of commerce felt almost supernatural. Numbers reinforced the shock. In 1944, U.S. households consumed more electricity than the entire German Reich. Detroit alone burned more kilowatts than several European countries combined. While German families rationed coal and huddled in cold apartments, Chicago illuminated entire districts nightly. For prisoners staring through boxcar slats, neon was not decoration. It was mathematics, proof of industrial dominance measured in watts. Even the air carried evidence. Germany smelled of wet wool, coal dust, and the metallic tang of rubble after air raids. In American towns, the wind carried frying onions from diners, tobacco smoke curling from men's lips, gasoline from traffic, even perfume from women walking to evening shows. A lieutenant scribbled later, "The streets smelled of food and fuel. It was the perfume of victory." BBC Oral History, 1962. Taste completed the sensory assault. Guards sometimes handed out chewing gum or Coca-Cola at stations. For men raised on ersatz coffee and beet syrup, the sweetness shocked their tongues. "The gum never lost flavor," one prisoner marveled. Ice cream was worse. Cold, smooth, abundant, offered without ceremony. In Germany, such indulgence had vanished by 1940. One soldier recalled, "I stood in front of a shop considering what to buy first, an ice cream or a bottle of Coca-Cola. So I decided to take both." History Link, 2017. Testimony of Günter Grave. These details, trivial to Americans, became unforgettable to prisoners. Guards' clean uniforms, children clutching candy larger than a month's ration in Germany, radios blaring jazz instead of sirens, all hammered home a single truth. America was fighting a world war without feeling like a nation at war. Axis motif strikes here. Underestimation collides with reality. German soldiers had been told America was soft, decadent, incapable of endurance. Yet every storefront, every billboard, every meal glimpsed from a train window argued the opposite. The shock was not just military defeat, it was cultural collapse. How could they reconcile the destruction of Hamburg with the sight of New York's skyscrapers glittering at night? How could they write home about Coca-Cola when their families scraped burned bread from pans? And always the numbers. The Red Cross reported that in 1944, an American civilian consumed an average of 3,200 calories daily, compared to under 1,900 in Germany. A single Midwestern grocery store displayed more tins of jam than some Wehrmacht units had captured in a month. We had fought for a single tin in Tunisia. Here it lay piled in stores by the hundreds. One diarist admitted, even the smallest details wounded. Berlin rationed bread at 200 grams per day. In Ohio, loaves sat unsold in bakeries. Soap was scarce in Hamburg. In Kansas, advertisements promised a dozen varieties. In Nuremberg, blackout curtains sealed every window. In Texas, neon blazed through the night. "Our Reich demanded sacrifice," one prisoner muttered. Here they advertised perfumes. Some tried to dismiss it as propaganda. "Perhaps they staged this for us," one officer insisted. Yet the scale was too vast. No government could orchestrate entire cities glowing with light and filled with cars just to impress prisoners. Silence often followed. They understood even if they could not admit it. What unsettled them most was the ordinariness. Bombers and tanks could be explained by factories and resources. But how could America wage total war and still let its civilians buy chewing gum, dance to jazz, drive new cars? That was the deeper shock. Victory was not only military, it was civilizational. Morning inspections set the rhythm of camp life. The prisoners lined up outside their barracks, boots scraping gravel, while guards counted them off. But the routine lacked the menace they expected. Guards barked orders, yes, but without cruelty. The inspection ended with distribution of rations. Bread still warm, butter soft, jam bright red. To men whose last taste of sweetness had been years before, it felt like a feast each morning. Even soap became a symbol. In Germany, families cut bars into tiny pieces, diluted them in water, stretching them through months. Here, prisoners received new bars regularly, stamped with American brands. They washed with hot water, steam filling barracks showers. To stand in warm water with soap between my hands was to realize we were captives of a richer world. One POW wrote in a diary preserved at the U.S. National Archives, 1946. The paradox grew sharper with recreation. Guards organized soccer tournaments, with entire compounds turning out to watch. Teams formed by region, men from Bavaria against men from Saxony. Matches ended with applause, laughter, and sometimes the guards themselves joining in. For men who had marched across deserts and through rubble, the sound of cheers without malice disoriented them. "We expected chains," one soldier said, "but they gave us footballs." Numbers illustrated the investment. By late 1944, the U.S. operated more than 600 POW camps across 46 states. Texas alone held nearly 80,000 men. Kansas camps harvested over 10 million bushels of wheat with prisoner labor in 1 year. In Georgia, tens of thousands cut timber. The system was vast, orderly, and above all humane by design. The United States was building villages of enemies, and yet fed them better than allies, a Red Cross inspector noted in 1945. The clang of the gates closing behind them marked the official beginning of captivity in America. But for many German prisoners, the sensation was less like imprisonment and more like stepping into a paradoxical village. Rows of wooden barracks stood clean, roofs intact, windows unbroken, gravel paths cut neatly between them. A guard tower loomed at each corner, rifles glinting in the sun, yet beneath that watchful presence, the compound felt strangely orderly, almost domestic. The first shock came at the mess hall. Prisoners lined up, trays in hand, bracing for thin soup, black bread, humiliation. Instead, they were met with ladles pouring beef stew thick with vegetables, slabs of white bread, pats of butter, mugs of coffee so strong its aroma filled the hall. Some froze in line, confused. Others ate in silence, unable to reconcile the propaganda of cruelty with the taste of abundance. "I eat better here than my family at home," one soldier wrote in his first censored letter, U.S. National Archives, 1946. The arithmetic was undeniable. In 1944, daily rations for American POW camps averaged 3,200 calories per man. By comparison, Berlin civilians were scraping by on fewer than 1,800. Red Cross inspectors toured camps and filed their reports. The men are well fed, clothed, and housed in accordance with international law. Red Cross Report, 1945. For the prisoners, that sentence alone was enough to unravel years of indoctrination. It wasn't just the food, but the consistency. Meals arrived at regular hours, served hot, with variation that German soldiers had forgotten existed. Chicken one day, beef the next, eggs for breakfast, even fruit on occasion. Coffee was real, not ersatz substitutes brewed from barley or acorns. The sight of milk astonished them. Some men hadn't tasted it fresh since 1939. The irony gnawed. While wives and children in Bremen or Leipzig queued for hours for potatoes, their husbands in American captivity were regaining weight. Barracks life deepened the contradiction. Each hut held long rows of bunks, stoves for heating, shelves for personal belongings. Blankets were thick, replaced when worn. Soap was issued weekly. Hot showers ran on schedule. One officer admitted in a diary entry later published in Germany, "I bathed more in captivity than in the field army. The water was hot. The soap smelled of perfume. I could not escape the thought. We were prisoners of a richer world." Recreation turned captivity into something stranger still. Soccer fields stretched inside the wire, balls provided by the YMCA. Teams formed by region, Bavarians against Saxons, North Germans against Rhinelanders. Matches ended with cheers, laughter, sometimes guards themselves joining in. For men hardened by the desert campaigns or the ruins of Stalingrad, the sound of joy felt foreign, almost unbearable. "We expected chains," one soldier muttered to his bunkmate, "but they gave us footballs." Numbers highlighted the scale of the system. By 1944, the U.S. maintained over 600 POW camps across 46 states. Texas alone held nearly 80,000 prisoners. Nebraska housed 12,000. Oklahoma, 20,000. The camps were not hidden in remote corners, but embedded in the heart of towns, where local farmers and businesses relied on their labor. A Red Cross inspector noted, "It is as if the United States has built villages for its enemies, and yet supplies them better than some allies." Work details carried the prisoners beyond the barbed wire, into the very fabric of American life. Each morning, trucks or buses collected squads of men, their boots echoing on wooden planks as guards counted them off. Rifles slung casually on American shoulders, but often unused. The guards knew what the prisoners knew. In the middle of Kansas, Texas, or Nebraska, there was nowhere to run. Escape meant hunger, endless fields, and capture within days. Fields became classrooms. Under the burning sun of the Midwest, prisoners pulled weeds, drove tractors, carried sacks of wheat. Machines astonished them most. A single combine could do in hours what dozens of men once did with scythes. Farmers leaned proudly against their machines, explaining in broken German or gestures how engines replaced muscle. We realized then that their true army was not only soldiers, but machines. One POW later recalled in a memoir preserved by the U.S. National Archives, 1946. The arithmetic was brutal. In one Kansas harvest alone, POW labor helped bring in over 10 million bushels of wheat. German provinces devastated by bombing produced less in an entire year. Men who had marched across Russia or North Africa stood stunned as tractors cut through acres with ease. A machine did the work of 50 men, a farmer told them. The phrase repeated in barracks at night, echoing like a refrain. Encounters with civilians carried deeper shocks. Farmers' wives brought sandwiches wrapped in paper, pitchers of iced tea sweating in the heat. Children stared wide-eyed at the strange men in foreign uniforms. Some dared to hand over apples or cookies. One prisoner recalled, "I was given a glass of lemonade by a woman whose son was in France. It was harder to drink than water in the desert. It made me ashamed." Red Cross inspectors recorded the effects. The men are not only healthy, but often gain weight. Work is compensated. Treatment humane. Red Cross Report, 1945. Some prisoners laughed bitterly. Civilians in Frankfurt starved while they fattened in Texas. The paradox bred guilt, a heavy silence during letter-writing hours. The labor assignments varied. In Arkansas sawmills, prisoners inhaled the resin of fresh-cut pine, sticky on their hands. In California canneries, they stood over conveyor belts, peaches slipping through their fingers, the sweetness staining their uniforms. In Georgia, they hauled timber, sweat pouring down backs, guards offering cold water with slices of lemon. In each case, sensory shocks marked the memory. Fruit, ice, sugar, water so cold it hurt their teeth. These were luxuries to men who remembered winters in cellars, chewing on turnip rations. Even work in road crews carried revelations. Asphalt stretched in wide black rivers across plains. Americans seemed obsessed with roads, building highways that cut across entire states. A sergeant whispered, "They are not only fighting a war, they are building for after." The idea rattled them. Germany dug trenches. America paved highways. One looked backward, the other forward. Payment came in coupons, 50 cents a day. In canteens, prisoners bought cigarettes, chocolate, soap, notebooks, even Coca-Cola. Some sent parcels home through the Red Cross, filled with goods that German families had not seen in years. Letters returned from wives carried disbelief. "You send soap and chocolate. Here we burn furniture for heat." The words cut deeply. Evenings in camp deepened the contradictions. Prisoners returned dusty, tired, but not broken. They lined up for showers, hot water streaming, steam rising into rafters, the scent of soap mixed with sweat. Another reminder of abundance. After dinner, some gathered on soccer fields, kicking balls until dusk. Others sat by radios listening to Bing Crosby croon or Benny Goodman's clarinet swing. The rhythms seeped into their bones, foreign yet intoxicating. One officer admitted, "Our Reich demanded silence. Here, even music rebelled. Cinema nights etched themselves into memory. White sheets hung in barracks became screens. Projectors flickered Hollywood's dream world. Musicals, westerns, comedies. Gene Kelly danced across makeshift walls. Rita Hayworth sang under Technicolor lights. German cities lay in rubble, theaters destroyed. Yet here, in captivity, men laughed at American comedies. The screen showed joy while our homes were silence." One POW wrote in his diary, BBC Oral History, 1962. Even religion became part of the paradox. Local churches invited prisoners to Sunday services under guard. They sat in pews beside civilians, hymns rising around them. Pastors prayed not only for American soldiers but for the souls of the prisoners. "They prayed for us," one recalled. "It disarmed us more than weapons." Nazi propaganda had described Americans as soulless materialists. In the voices of children singing hymns that lie dissolved. The numbers of contact were immense. By 1945, nearly 90% of all able-bodied POWs in America were working daily. Farms, factories, forests, roads, all bore their labor. They logged millions of hours, earning millions in coupons. Yet the work was not humiliation. It was integration. We were enemies, but also laborers. In their fields, we saw America as it truly was. One diary noted, "The senses carried every lesson. The taste of peaches in canneries, the smell of gasoline on highways, the sound of swing over radios, the touch of cold lemonade in a farmyard glass. Each detail reinforced the same truth. This enemy was not weak. It was inexhaustible. By winter, snow dusted the camp fences, wind whistled against wooden walls. In Germany, coal was rationed. Families shivered in darkened flats. In America, stoves inside the barracks glowed with steady heat, fueled by supplies prisoners never saw depleted. Men stretched hands toward flames, steam rising from mugs of coffee. The irony was sharp. Prisoners of war were warmer than their children hiding in bombed-out basements. Soap remained plentiful, issued weekly. In Hamburg, wives cut thin slivers from shrinking bars. In Nebraska, prisoners lathered freely, steam clouding shower stalls. Cleanliness became part of our captivity, one lieutenant wrote, and each bar of soap was a reminder of the chasm between our world and theirs. U.S. National Archives, 1946. Even boredom carried revelations. With work assignments reduced in winter, men filled hours with classes, lectures, and crafts. American universities donated books. Professors volunteered. Barracks transformed into classrooms where defeated officers debated Plato, studied English, or scribbled equations on chalkboards. We were captives, yet we learned, one remembered. For men raised in a Reich that censored thought, the freedom to study in captivity was almost unbearable. Music and theater flourished. Some camps built orchestras, others staged plays. Instruments arrived from church donations. Violins, accordions, drums filled the compounds with sound. Performances drew hundreds of prisoners and sometimes American guests. Applause echoed across barbed wire. A sergeant said later, "We were enemies, yet we laughed with them. It was the strangest defeat imaginable." By the end of 1945, German POWs had worked more than 60 million man-days on American soil. They harvested crops worth billions, repaired roads, built barns, stacked lumber. Each received coupons. Each spent them in canteens stocked with goods Germans had not seen in years. Soap, chocolate, cigarettes, notebooks, all became currencies of memory. Letters home betrayed the tension. Wives wrote from ruins, "We burn furniture for heat." Husbands replied from captivity, "I am healthy, they feed us meat." Censors cut details, but truths slipped through. Families read between the lines. The enemy was not starving their men, it was feeding them better than Germany could. By spring, prisoners returned to fields, harvesting again, driving tractors, watching highways extend across plains. Some admitted admiration, others sank into silence, unable to reconcile humiliation with comfort. But all carried the same realization. America's power lay not only in tanks and planes, but in the ordinary resilience of its people. By autumn 1944, captivity had settled into rhythm, yet new shocks arrived every week. If food and work had unsettled the prisoners, culture finished the job. America did not merely feed its enemies, it exposed them to its inner life. For men raised on discipline and propaganda, that was more disarming than fences or guards. Bundles of newspapers arrived daily. At first, the men flipped pages only for war news. Normandy, the Eastern Front, the bombing of German cities. But their eyes drifted downward. Advertisements screamed promises. Radios with shining dials, refrigerators humming with ice, cars with chrome grills gleaming in photographs. The war reports terrified us, one POW admitted, but the ads humiliated us. They revealed a society that had more than it needed. U.S. National Archives, 1946. Arithmetic sharpened the point. In Germany, ration books dictated grams of butter, ounces of meat, spoonfuls of ersatz coffee. In American newspapers, stores offered pounds of sugar, gallons of milk, endless varieties of soap. An advertisement for shoes in Kansas listed more models than Berlin could produce in a year, another recalled. Prosperity was not rumor. It was printed daily in ink. Radio deepened the intrusion. Loudspeakers carried local stations into the compounds. Bing Crosby crooned, "I'll be seeing you." Benny Goodman's clarinet swung through the air. To men drilled on marches, the looseness of swing was bewildering. They tapped feet unconsciously, then stopped, ashamed. Others surrendered to rhythm. "If this is decadence," one whispered, "then it is stronger than our discipline." Axis motif reemerged. What had been dismissed as weakness revealed itself as strength. German ideology labeled jazz degenerate. In American airwaves, it sounded like confidence. Cinema nights carved the lesson deeper. Camps set up projectors on weekends. White sheets hung as screens. Hollywood poured its fantasies across barbed wire. Musicals, westerns, comedies. Gene Kelly danced in perfect time. Judy Garland sang under Technicolor skies. Humphrey Bogart muttered cool lines. For Germans whose theaters lay in ruins, the glow of film was unbearable. The screen showed laughter while our homes were silence. One prisoner wrote, BBC Oral History, 1962. The arithmetic of cinema was overwhelming. By 1944, Hollywood released more than 400 films annually. Germany, crippled by war and censorship, produced barely a fraction. One nation exported dreams. The other rationed silence. The conclusion was inescapable. Books followed. Universities donated crates. German classics sat beside Shakespeare, Melville, Twain. English classes sprang up. Prisoners scribbling new words in notebooks. Lectures filled barracks. Officers debating Plato. Sergeants practicing mathematics. Young soldiers sketching machines glimpsed in American towns. "We were defeated soldiers," one officer recalled. Yet in Oklahoma, we studied philosophy freely. Red Cross Report, 1945. Religion disarmed in another way. Local churches invited prisoners to Sunday services. They sat in pews under guard, civilians beside them. Hymns rose. Pastors prayed not only for their own sons, but for the souls of the captives. "They prayed for us," one POW whispered afterward. "That wounded us more than bullets." Nazi propaganda had painted Americans as soulless materialists. In the voices of children singing, that lie collapsed. Taste reinforced culture. Hershey bars melted on tongues. Coca-Cola fizzed in bottles. Chewing gum stretched endlessly. The gum never lost flavor. It was a miracle in the mouth, one remembered. Luxuries trivial to Americans became unforgettable emblems. Ethical capsule pressed forward. At the time, U.S. officials justified such programs, movies, newspapers, classes, as Geneva compliance. Critics at home protested, "Why let enemy soldiers watch films and eat chocolate while Americans rationed?" Historians now argue it was strategy as much as morality. By showing prosperity, America dismantled ideology more effectively than brutality could. Was kindness humanity or psychological warfare? The debate continues. Winter brought boredom, but even that carried lessons. Camps turned into theaters. Prisoners built orchestras from donated instruments, staged plays in barracks. Applause echoed across wire. "We were enemies, yet we laughed with them," a sergeant later said. It was the strangest defeat imaginable. Numbers frame it clearly. By 1945, over 600 camps held German prisoners. Tens of thousands attended language classes. Hundreds of productions, staged plays or concerts. Millions of newspapers distributed across compounds. Culture had become another front line, fought not with bullets but with songs, pages, reels. Axis motif closed the block. Underestimation met confrontation. Confrontation turned into immersion. Food, lights, machines had shocked first. Now ideas, music, laughter did the same. For German POWs, captivity was not deprivation but revelation. By 1945, captivity had hardened into routine. Men woke to whistles, lined up for roll call, marched to work details, returned for meals. Yet what filled their minds most was not the monotony inside the fence, but the contrast outside it. Letters from home arrived in stacks each week, censored but not silenced. and each one opened a gulf wider than the Atlantic. A wife in Hamburg wrote, "We hide from bombs in the cellar. The children cry at night from hunger. There is no soap, no coal." The husband, writing back from a camp in Texas, was forbidden to describe much. Still, he managed, "I am healthy. They feed us meat and bread every day." Relief mixed with agony. She knew her husband was alive, but she also knew he lived better as a prisoner than she did as a civilian. The arithmetic of rations made the truth unavoidable. In 1944, an American prisoner consumed roughly 3,200 calories per day. In Berlin, civilians averaged less than 1,700. Prisoners drank milk with breakfast, ate fruit at lunch, sometimes even tasted ice cream. Families at home scraped together turnips, ersatz bread, watered soup. "I eat white bread every morning." One soldier confessed in a letter, "My wife has not seen such bread in years." Axis motif sharpened. Underestimation had collided with confrontation, and now confrontation yielded consequences. The enemy they had dismissed as weak not only defeated them, but fed them better than their own nation could feed its people. Conversations in barracks circled around guilt. A corporal whispered at night, "My children hide from bombs while I drink coffee." Others nodded silently. Some argued it was propaganda. Perhaps the Americans fattened them deliberately for show. Yet the taste of butter, the crunch of apples, the weight gained in captivity were too real to dismiss. News filtered in through radios, newspapers, and letters. Hamburg burned. Dresden turned to cinders. Berlin shattered block by block. Prisoners wept as they read lines describing rubble, evacuations, families fleeing west. One corporal admitted, "I felt relief that I was not there, and shame that I was not there." The paradox cut into them more deeply than defeat on the battlefield. Ethical capsule belongs here. At the time, American officials insisted they simply followed Geneva. Critics at home fumed. Why should enemy soldiers eat steaks while American civilians rationed? Historians today debate whether this abundance was humanity or calculation. Did America feed POWs well out of moral duty, or because each letter home became psychological warfare? The argument continues. Work assignments added fuel to guilt. Farmers explained how one tractor equaled 50 men. Germans compared. In their homeland, wagons still creaked behind horses. Here, engines multiplied labor. POWs returned to barracks repeating the phrase, "Machines are their real army." The truth stung worse than hunger ever had. Letters became silent weapons. Tens of millions crossed the Atlantic. Each carried fragments of abundance. Coffee, soap, Coca-Cola. Wives read between the lines, realizing their husbands were safer in captivity than their children in ruins. A woman in Cologne received a parcel with chocolate and a note. "For the children, I am well." She wept, not only from gratitude but from despair. Each letter home carried more than words. It carried arithmetic. A husband in Oklahoma wrote cautiously, "We are treated according to international law. I have enough to eat." His wife in Leipzig read between the lines. Enough to eat meant more than her children had in weeks. He enclosed a bar of soap. She broke it into pieces, trading slivers for potatoes at the market. For her, captivity across an ocean had become survival for the family. The Red Cross tracked the flow. By late 1944, German prisoners in the U.S. sent millions of parcels containing cigarettes, soap, chocolate, even small sums of money. For families in Cologne or Bremen, these goods were lifelines. A wife might hold a Hershey bar mailed from Texas and wonder at the strangeness. Her husband, a defeated soldier, now kept his children alive with American sugar. Axis motif sharpened again. Underestimation turned into confrontation. Confrontation into consequence. America's abundance not only disarmed the soldier, it reached into German kitchens. The guilt cut both ways. Prisoners ate meat stews and white bread while wives boiled nettles for soup. In barracks, men whispered confessions. "I cannot describe to my wife how much we eat," one said, "because it would break her." Another wrote carefully, "I am healthy. I pray you are safe." Between the lines, she read the truth. he lived better in chains than she did in freedom. Numbers widened the gulf. In 1945, American POW camps consumed billions of pounds of food to feed their captives. Germany's urban centers starved. Hamburg civilians averaged less than 1,500 calories per day after the firebombing. By contrast, a prisoner in Nebraska might gain weight, reaching 160 pounds again after years of war. Diaries recorded the shame openly. We were the fed ones. They were the starved ones. The war had reversed logic. U.S. National Archives, 1946. Radio reports deepened the fracture. News bulletins described Allied bombings, Soviet advances, German retreats. Prisoners heard the words with dread, knowing their families suffered what they escaped. Some men wept openly in bunks. Others clenched jaws, refusing to speak. Silence became the only dignity left. Even daily labor fueled comparisons. A prisoner cutting timber in Georgia saw sawmills buzzing with electricity. In Germany, lumber yards sat idle for lack of fuel. Another, harvesting wheat in Kansas, watched tractors pulling combines through fields. "One machine equaled our entire village," he wrote later. The realization was unbearable. Germany demanded sacrifice. America multiplied plenty. The psychological fracture widened. Some clung to loyalty, insisting the Reich would recover, but others admitted what they could no longer deny. "We lost not only the war," one officer said in Oklahoma, "we lost the century." Conversations after lights out circled endlessly. Could Germany ever match a society that built tanks and tractors while feeding its prisoners steak? The sensory contrasts reinforced the guilt. Barracks smelled of stew and coffee. Letters from wives smelled of smoke and mold. POWs chewed gum while their children chewed bark. Prisoners slept under thick blankets. Families burned furniture for heat. Every comfort turned into accusation. By spring 1945, the war in Europe neared collapse, and the letters sharpened in tone. Husbands wrote carefully, avoiding descriptions of food or comfort. Yet silence spoke louder than words. Families pieced together truth. Their men were alive, healthy, heavier even, while they themselves wasted in ruins. A wife in Cologne replied to her husband's cautious note, "I am glad you eat." The children ask why we cannot. He read the sentence under a bare light bulb in a Nebraska barrack and felt a weight heavier than chains. Another letter from Dresden, smudged with soot, told a husband, "The city no longer exists. We sleep under the sky." The children cough from the smoke. He wept openly. His comrades turned away, ashamed by his grief. Red Cross observers noticed the divide. The prisoners often appear healthier than news of their families would suggest. One report noted in March 1945. Guards, too, saw the irony. Some looked away when men cried after mail call. Others quietly offered cigarettes. Humanity, once again, became the weapon America wielded best. The arithmetic of captivity was cruel. In New York docks, ships unloaded fruit and meat by the ton. In Berlin, rations shrank below survival levels. In Kansas, prisoners ate 3,000 calories daily. In Leipzig, civilians survived on half that. One sergeant admitted in his diary, "The numbers broke me more than battles. My wife is starving. I am gaining weight." U.S. National Archives, 1946. Ethical capsule sharpens here. Geneva required humane treatment but not generosity. America exceeded requirements. Was that compassion or design? Historians argue it was both. Humane camps weakened Nazi propaganda, planting seeds for future reconciliation. Yet for prisoners at the time, morality blurred into torment. Comfort tasted like betrayal when wives wrote of hunger. Even boredom became a battlefield of conscience. Men played chess on carved boards, studied English, listened to jazz. Outside, their families crouched in basements under bombs. Some prisoners refused canteen luxuries, letting coupons expire. Others hoarded chocolate to mail home. Each choice carried silent judgment. The paradox never resolved. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, joy swept through American towns. In camps, prisoners watched fireworks beyond fences, stunned by celebration. They cheered for peace, but quietly, ashamed to admit relief. "We were alive, well-fed, safe," one wrote later. And that truth was heavier than defeat itself. Axis motif closed Block 4. Underestimation had given way to recognition, recognition to guilt, guilt to consequence. For German POWs, the deepest shock was not barbed wire or armed guards. It was the knowledge that captivity offered more life than freedom at home, and that realization marked them forever. The war ended in May 1945, but for German prisoners in America, the fences did not vanish overnight. Victory parades filled American cities, fireworks cracked above main streets, crowds cheered as soldiers returned home. In the camps, men watched the sky glow with celebration, listening to radios that announced Germany's surrender. They cheered quietly for peace, but the relief carried weight. They knew they had survived not only defeat, but comfort. Repatriation began in slow, uneven waves. Trains collected thousands from camps, carrying them back to ports. Ships ferried them across the Atlantic, docking at Le Havre or Bremerhaven. Men who had eaten beef stew and Coca-Cola in Oklahoma stepped onto quays lined with rubble. They walked past children with hollow cheeks, women with tired eyes, old men pushing carts piled with debris. The shock of return was almost as great as the shock of arrival years before. For many, the first steps on German soil cut deeper than battle wounds. "We came back heavier, healthier, carrying gifts," one POW recalled. "Our brothers met us with hunger in their faces." U.S. National Archives, 1946. Families greeted them with relief, but also suspicion. How could captives return stronger than civilians? Some wives asked in whispers, "Did you suffer at all?" Husbands hesitated, unable to explain. They had lived in another world. Numbers bore out the paradox. Of the nearly 370,000 German POWs held in America, most gained weight during captivity. Red Cross records noted average increases of 10 to 15 pounds. By contrast, civilians in Berlin or Cologne lost weight steadily through the war's final years. The contrast bred quiet resentment. "Our men came home looking better than those who had stayed," one woman in Hamburg recalled. Guilt shadowed reunions. A prisoner who had written letters full of cautious reassurance now faced wives who had burned furniture for heat. He carried memories of Coca-Cola, ice cream, neon lights. She carried memories of bomb shelters, ration cards, endless funerals. Some marriages strained under the unspoken divide. One man later confessed, "She could not forgive me for being safe." Not all stories ended in silence. Some men shared openly what they had seen. Farmers in Bavaria described American tractors, recalling machines that harvested acres in hours. Teachers repeated English words learned in barracks. Musicians played jazz remembered from camp radios. Even chewing gum became a symbol, snapped between teeth as proof that another world had once existed. Some prisoners emigrated. By the early 1950s, tens of thousands of former POWs returned to the United States, this time as immigrants. They settled in Texas, Nebraska, Wisconsin, drawn back to farms they had worked during captivity. They carried memories of iced tea on porches, of children offering apples, of hymns sung in white-steepled churches. For them, America was no longer an enemy. It had become possibility. Others stayed in Germany but carried the influence home. A farmer applied crop techniques he had learned in Kansas. A teacher in Bremen introduced English lessons using a camp dictionary. A carpenter in Cologne built furniture modeled on American styles. Small fragments of life behind barbed wire seeded change in post-war Germany. Historians later measured the impact. Surveys in the 1950s showed that former POWs were significantly more favorable toward cooperation with the United States than Germans who had never left Europe. Abundance had become persuasion. The arsenal of democracy was not only steel and fire, but soap, chocolate, and song. Red Cross Report, 1950. Individual stories gave the statistics flesh. Gunter Grave, once captured in North Africa, remembered standing in front of a shop in Washington state, torn between buying ice cream or Coca-Cola. He bought both. Decades later, he returned to the U.S. on an electric bicycle, a sign fixed to the rear wheel. USA, the country and its people, you are my first and final love. His story echoed thousands who carried America not as an enemy, but as memory. Music played its part in the legacy. Jazz, once condemned as degenerate, seeped into German clubs. Soldiers who had tapped their feet in Oklahoma now sought out records of Benny Goodman and Duke Ellington. Churches, once strict, added hymns borrowed from American congregations. Children learned English songs in schoolyards. A cultural bridge had formed not by diplomacy, but by captivity. The ethical paradox sharpened one final time. In 1946, German newspapers published debates. Was it fair that POWs returned, praising their treatment while civilians had suffered? Some accused returnees of exaggeration. Others insisted the stories were true. Historians today confirm the U.S. exceeded Geneva requirements deliberately. Humane treatment became soft power, laying foundations for reconciliation. Was this generosity or calculation? The line remains blurred. The arithmetic of legacy can still be measured. A study in the 1950s found that former POWs were more likely than average Germans to support cooperation with the West. Many joined political movements that favored integration with NATO. Others became cultural conduits, introducing American habits, blue jeans, chewing gum, jazz, into post-war life. Even trivial gestures carried weight. A father offering his child a Hershey bar in 1947 was more than candy. It was testimony. By the late 1940s, the war had ended for years, but the memories of captivity remained sharp. Former POWs spoke of neon lights glimpsed from train windows, of Coca-Cola bottles clinking in canteens, of jazz leaking through guardhouse radios. They carried those images into a defeated Germany that was struggling to rebuild. For many, those memories shaped their view of the world more than any speech or pamphlet. The meta-narrative sharpened in their silence as well as in their words. Many refused to describe details to hungry families. Others spoke cautiously, fearing resentment. But in time, stories leaked, growing into collective memory. Children learned from fathers that the enemy was not weak, not cruel, not decadent. The enemy was strong, wealthy, humane, and that truth reshaped how Germans viewed the world. Micro-hook for the finale. Perhaps the most enduring battlefield of the Second World War was not fought with tanks or bombers, but with ordinary life seen through the eyes of prisoners. The final lesson rises here. Wars are measured in destroyed cities, lost battles, millions dead. Yet for the men who walked America's streets under guard, the most powerful weapon was not firepower, but abundance. A bar of chocolate, a glass of iced tea, a neon sign after dusk, these carried more force than rifles. They dismantled belief, sowed doubt, planted seeds for reconciliation. And so the story ends not with barbed wire, but with memory. German POWs returned to rubble, carrying fragments of another world. Their shock was lasting, their testimony endured, and their silence, when they could not speak of ice cream or Coca-Cola to starving wives, was heavier than chains. America had fought with bombers and tanks, but it also fought with bread, soap, music, and light. And for thousands of German prisoners, that was the greater victory, the quiet triumph that turned captivity into revelation and memory into legacy.